Mob Daughter by KaReN Gravano, Chapter 2. They are bad people, but they are our bad people. My father was a gangster even before I was born. My parents lived in Bensonhurst. When I made my appearance in the maternity ward of St. John's Catholic Hospital on 4th Avenue in Brooklyn on May 8, 1972, my parents, Deborah Scabetta and Salvatore Sammy Gravano, couldn't have been more proud. My mother was 18 and my father was 26. They were still newlyweds, married for just over a year. My mother's twin sister Diane had introduced the two. Diane knew my father was from the neighborhood. In Bensonhurst, Brooklyn's Little Italy, everybody knew everybody. There were blocks and blocks of identical detached two-story houses with little fenced yards and street parking. In the pizzerias and bakeries along 18th Avenue, everybody spoke Italian and knew the names of all the babies in the carriages. Sundays were for church, big meals, and family. My Aunt Diane was more outspoken than my mother and hung out with more people in the neighborhood. My mother was reserved and very shy and didn't go out that often. She was a pretty brunette. She had a great figure and a radiance of innocence, and my father was smitten. She wasn't into clothing and fashion, although she always looked nice in an understated way. What he liked about her best was that she was not like the other girls who frequented his after-hours club in Fort Hamilton, who wore lots of makeup and acted slutty. My father was instantly attracted to my mother. He said he knew she was the one for him. He could tell right away that she would be a devoted wife and mother. They dated for less than a year before they were married. When my father first asked my grandparents, Sandra and John Scabetta, for my mother's hand, they were not too thrilled. Sammy had a reputation as a thug. He'd had a couple of run-ins with the law and had been in lots of fights. My mother's parents knew my father's parents, aunts, and uncles, and knew them to be good people. Still at the time, Sammy was a member of the Rampers, a prominent Brooklyn street gang. The Rampers were involved in armed robberies, burglaries, car thefts, and extortion, rising hoods heading for a life of crime. They'd started off with trunking, robbing people's trunks for spare tires. Unbeknownst to his future in-laws, my father was also a recently inducted associate of the Colombo crime family under Joseph Colombo. But Sammy had been very respectful and charming with their daughter, so they begrudgingly gave him their blessing, saying they would have to wait until Deborah turned 18. They didn't think Sammy would be able to marry their daughter anytime soon anyway, because catering halls for the reception were booked a year in advance. They were certain the romance would fizzle out by then. Sammy had a connection at the Colonel Mansion, a splashy catering hall on Bath Avenue and 22nd Street, with marble floors and crystal chandeliers, and was able to get the hall in less than 1 month. The wedding itself took place at St. Bernadette's Church on Friday, April 16th, 1971, 1 month shy of Deborah's 18th birthday. More than 300 people, mostly from the neighborhood, including a few of the wise guys, were there to witness the union and join in the celebration afterward at the mansion. Everybody was hoping that once Sammy settled down and had children, he would abandon his criminal ways. They weren't too far off the mark, because after I was born, our family moved out of Brooklyn to my father's parents' house in Ronkonkoma. Oh, I don't know how to say that one, y'all. Apologize. A town on Long Island about an hour east of Bensonhurst. My father had spent his childhood summers in the tiny house that eventually became my grandparents' permanent home. When our family moved out there, my grandparents happily converted the attic into living quarters for us. My father was determined to go straight and to find honest work. His epiphany came at a moment of desperation when he and my mother had to bust open my piggy bank to be able to buy enough food for dinner. His brother-in-law, Eddie Grafala, his sister Fran's husband, offered him work. Eddie was a partner in a small construction business that specialized in plumbing and had plenty for him to do. My father started working long hours, but was still earning less than $100 a week. When he asked Eddie for a raise, my uncle and his partner told him that 10 cents more an hour was all they could spare. Pissed off, Sammy went to work for another construction company that was run by a friend of my mother's uncle. There he started at 175 a week, but within 10 months was making 250. He was beginning to feel optimistic about being able to provide for his family legitimately in the construction business. The family was out on Long Island for less than 1 year when my father and another guy, Ali Boy Cuomo, were indicted for the murders of two brothers, Arthur and Joseph Dunn, from Coney Island. The two had operated a local auto body shop, but had not been made good on a loan. When they were gunned down in 1969. Based on information from a thug already in jail on something else, my father and Allie Boy were arrested. The thug wanted to get his sentence shortened and offered up my father and Allie Boy for shaking him down a couple of years earlier. My father knew he was being framed. He had never heard of the Dunn brothers, but that didn't help with his arrest. My father's boss in the Gambino family, Tato Ariello, loaned him $10,000 to make bail, on the condition that he pay him back with interest. Because he also needed money to pay his legal bills and support the family, he had to go back to Bensonhurst. We had to go back to Bensonhurst. We moved into my mom's parents' 5-room apartment on 15th Avenue. My Aunt Diane was still living at home, and we all shared her small bedroom while she slept on a couch in the living room. Back in the same old neighborhood, my father was doing the same bad things every night, robbing and stealing to get enough money to pay for the lawyers for his defense. He said he didn't do the murders. It was a made-up case, but he still had a mount of defense. He didn't have any other way to make that kind of money. He needed to pay the legal fees. To make matters worse, he was arrested 3 times while he was out on bail, so his legal bills were mounting. 2 weeks before the double murder case was scheduled to go to trial, it was dismissed because there were so many inconsistencies in the guy's story. In one of them, the thug had claimed my father was driving a white 72 Lincoln, but Sammy didn't own that car until years after the murders. Even though my dad was cleared, there was no turning back from his life of crime. His attorney fees had left him in debt. He realized that if he was going to be in the business of crime, he was going to have to do it 100%. That was my father's motto. Whatever he did it 100%. Whether he was a criminal, a father, or someone cooperating with the authorities. Whatever choices he made, he was going to follow through with no turning back. Soon, he started pulling in enough money to rent his own apartment and moved us out of my grandparents' home and into an apartment on 61st Street. My mother was one of those very loyal wives who would stand by her man through thick and thin and ask no questions. She never really questioned my father because she believed in her heart that he meant well. I know she wished they had never left Long Island in her dream for a simple life. As the mother of his children, she supported whatever decisions he made. I'm sure at times she wished that it could have been different. But she understood that when the breadwinners came home from a long day, they didn't tell the wives what they did, and the women didn't ask questions. So she surrounded herself with her kids, her sister, her parents, and some of the wives of the men in my father's crew who understood this lifestyle. Neither of my sets of grandparents was involved in the mob. My maternal grandmother and grandfather both worked to provide for their family. My grandfather worked nights for the Western Electric Telephone Company putting together circuit boards, and my grandmother had a job at a dry cleaner's. They had been able to save enough money to buy a summer home in Pennsylvania where they could escape from the city. My father's parents came to America from Italy. The family was very poor. All of the men in the family had come first, then sent for the women and children. My grandfather, Girlando, in Italy, but Jerry here, was the youngest boy and was the last to come. He was in his mid-teens when he traveled alone by freighter from Sicily to Canada. When the boat reached Canada, he jumped ship, and he had to find his way to New York with only a telephone number. Because he slipped into the United States illegally, he was never able to get his U.S. citizenship. He was very Italian, abided by his strict Italian traditions, and spoke either Italian or very broken English and a strong Italian accent. My father's mother was Caterina, but everyone called her Kay. She had been born in the United States and raised her 3 children to speak English, knowing they would need it to be successful here. As a kid, I remember thinking how strange it was that my grandmother, aunts, and father spoke English well, but my grandfather did not. When Grandpa Gravano first got to New York, he found work as a house painter. I don't know how he met my grandmother, but she was a seamstress when they got married. Grandpa's exposure to so much pain gave him lead poisoning, so my grandmother, always an ambitious and hardworking woman, supported them. My grandmother's boss helped her open a dress factory in Bensonhurst, and my grandfather helped her run it. Aw. I remember my grandmother always wearing nice dresses. She walked a lot, which helped her keep her nice shape. My grandparents had their children later in life, delayed by a couple of miscarriages. Oh. Finally, they produced three children. First, two daughters, Jeannie and Fran, and then a son, Salvatore. Dad's parents called him Sammy because he had such a resemblance to his Uncle Sammy. The name stuck. He was my grandmother's baby. Even though my grandparents were not involved with the mafia, a lot of mafia members lived in their neighborhood. In Sicily, where Cosa Nostra started, the members protected their neighborhoods. When they came over from Italy, they also felt like they were protecting their, their communities, and they were very respected. Grandpa Gravano was familiar with the mafia culture and always treated the members with appropriate respect. They would be hanging around outside of the social clubs when my grandfather and my dad would pass on their way to the dress factory. They knew my grandfather's name and would always shout hello across the street. My father was curious how my grandfather knew them. My grandfather explained that they weren't hard-working, nice people. They are bad people, but they are our bad people, he would say. He told my father that they were the ones the Italian community would turn to when they had problems to resolve. There was a lot of anti-Italian sentiment back then, and Italians felt it better to take care of business like they did in the old country. He made it clear that they should be respected but avoided. My father said he was the kind of kid who got into fights in the playground at school. He was a lousy student, which caused him to be humiliated and teased mercilessly. The only way he could be respected was to take it outside. There the bullies would give him alone. There the bullies would leave him alone. When my dad was in 4th grade, he was held back for a learning disability. He had a severe case of dyslexia, but at the time, his teachers assessed him as being mentally retarded. Uh-oh. No, he tried to laugh it off by being the class clown, but using his fists to take down troublemakers was easier and more satisfying, so anyone who dared to tease him was beat up after school. On Sammy's 10th birthday, my grandparents bought him a new bike. Some kids stole it, but Sammy spotted it 1 week later across the street from the social club. When he went to claim it, he took on the two kids who refused to give it back. He put up a fight, earning him the nickname Little Bull from a couple of wise guys who watched the whole thing go down. When my father was 13, he got a taste of the power of the men in the mob. One day, he was at the dress factory helping my grandfather with the payroll. A couple of Irish-looking thugs came into the office. They said they were from the union and threatened my grandfather, saying he would have to either start making payoffs or unionize the place or face getting his legs busted up. My father was very upset by the disrespect they showed him. His father told him that everything was under control. Zovito would fix it. Sammy knew Zovito was an old, frail guy from the neighborhood. He couldn't fight two brawny, angry Irish thugs. His rampant buddies gave him a gun and advised him to blow the two guys away. When Monday morning came around, the men arrived as scheduled, but this time they were completely friendly and apologetic. They said they didn't know Zovito was Jerry's comadre. Everything was good and everybody shook hands. Sammy was stunned. His father again said there was nothing to worry about. Zovito was a powerful person, a bad guy, but our bad guy. When Sammy showed his father the gun, Jerry was livid. He glared at his son, took the gun, and said that the Gravanos were legitimate, honest people. He said if they had problems, they'd go to people like Zovito for help. The grandfather didn't hit him, but my father said this was probably the closest he had ever come. Eventually, Sammy learned the truth that Zovito and the other guys who hung around in front of the social clubs were gangsters. He decided he wanted the lifestyle. The fights in the playground were escalating. He was a miserable failure academically. At 16, his parents were forced to sign him out of school, and his formal education was over. My Father preferred life with the rappers anyway. Gang life was exciting. Every big payoffs for the brazen ones. Many rappers aspired to be in the mafia, and my father was a good earner, meaning he had the necessary makings to be a gangster. He was loyal, he was a moneymaker, he was a natural leader, and he had the ability to whack somebody. He soon caught the eye of Joe Colombo, the head of the Colombo crime family. Colombo remembered that my father had beat up his two sons at a movie theater a couple of years earlier. Colombo hadn't held that against him. In fact, he liked the fact that my father had let them go before he totally broke their asses. Colombo made Sammy an associate in his organization along with his rapper's buddy Tommy Sparrow. By being associates, both of them answered to made members of the mafia. To become made, an associate had to be sponsored by a made man. At the time, the books of the crime families were closed and had been for 11 years. Both men were hopeful that they were going to be brought in when the books reopened. My father was assigned to the crew of Thomas Shorty Sparrow, Tommy's uncle. His first job was to rob a clothing store, and his second assignment was a bank. After both those holdups, he was arrested but managed to escape conviction after witnesses changed their minds about testifying. My father had been a Colombo family associate for 2 years when he was asked to whack somebody for the first time. He was just 25 years old the day he shot his victim, Joe Colucci, 2 times in the back of the head with a Beatles tune playing in the background. The word was that Colucci, a fellow Colombo associate, was going to whack Sammy, so Sammy was authorized by Colombo Capo Carmine Persico to take him out first. At 4 in the morning, after a night of club hopping, Joe, Sammy, Tommy Sparrow, and another guy, Frankie, got into a car. Sammy was in the back seat and Joe was in front of him in the passenger seat. Driving down the Belt Parkway in Brooklyn at a pretty good speed, Sammy placed 2 bullets in Joe's head told the driver to get off in a residential neighborhood and dump Joe face down in the street. He fired 3 bullets into his body to be sure the hit was complete. After that, Sammy found himself with a different kind of respect. He now had clout and prestige in certain circles. He was no longer waiting in line to get into discos and clubs, and the bosses loved him. He was well on his way to becoming a mobster. Sammy didn't stay long with the Colombo family. Ralph and Shorty Sparrow were a little jealous about the attention he was getting and worried he would be made before Shorty's nephew, young Tommy. With everybody's blessing, my father was transferred to the Gambino family, where he fell under the mentoring of Uncle Tato. Shortly after, he became a made man, someone with full membership in the Costa Nostra Brotherhood. During a secret induction ceremony conducted in the basement of one of the boss's homes, he swore his loyalty to the Gambino organization. One of the men asked him which finger he used when he pulled the trigger of a gun, and when he presented his index finger, the man pricked it and smeared some blood on a picture of a saint. Sammy held the picture on his palms while it was set on fire, hearing the admonishment that if he broke his allegiance, he would burn in hell just like the depiction of the saint. He also swore to honor Amarada, the code of silence. When the ceremony was over, he had all the privileges and protection of a made man, but the dues were he had to kill for the Brotherhood too. He described his induction as being one of the proudest moments of his life, even though the burning of the saint left painful white blisters all over his palms. That was Chapter 2, Mob Daughter, by KaReN Gravano. Next video will be Chapter 3.